Hello, everybody. Hello, Patty and Dina. Hello, friends out there in cyberspace, all connected somewhere into the sacred earth. We are from the Christian Animism Network, and you may have seen some of our videos already. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit. We're going to be departing from sort of a themed discussion, and we're going to just be sharing a few thoughts on different books that have inspired each of us in our journeys toward and within Christian animism. We haven't discussed, so we haven't sort of coordinated this out beforehand. So I don't know what folks' books are. We don't know each other's books, so it'll be interesting for us to see what we're. And we're hoping that this will be useful for those of you who are just starting this journey, and also those of you who are well into it. You might see some familiar books too. So we're just going to go around the screen a couple of times and give you the books that feed us. So I'm going to turn it over to Patty to begin with.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for that introduction. It just occurred to me how funny it would be if we all picked the same books. What are the chances? All the books in the universe. So I have a couple books by Indigenous writers that have kind of given me a glimpse of how a different worldview might help me make sense of the world that I live in. One of my first experiences, and the three of us and lots of people have read Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. That was the first time that I had ever had that experience of seeing a different way of imagining the world and how we might relate to it. When Robin Wall Kimmerer talked about how she would go and speak to the sweetgrass before she harvested it and wait to see if there was a yes or a no, and that most of the time she got a yes, but sometimes she got a clear no, and then she'd go on to something else because there was something that she didn't know, and that was all good. And I remember reading that and thinking, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense, and that is so beautiful. I never would have had words for it. And then so seeing her do it, like be modeling that, was so amazing. And then when I first tried it, it felt like such a right, humble way to come to the plants, or it was some decorative things at Christmas time while we were living in England. So it felt really weird the first time I did it, and something very foreign, but just such a blessing to have received that other way of seeing the world and learning to notice what's around me, notice the plants and animals and things that are here in creation in a different way. So the two books, one of them is called People of the Whale by Linda Hogan, which was written or published in 2008. It's about the Atsika people of Washington State, and the main character is a man named Thomas Whitka Just, who has inherited his ancestral capacity for breathing underwater for a long time, and thus being able to communicate with the whales. And he then makes a decision to enlist, and he ends up going to Vietnam and comes back very, with PTSD and just unable to function in the way that he did. Comes back to his village, comes back to his people, can't really engage, but then they want to go on a whale hunt in the way they had traditionally done in their people, but that their people hadn't done for a while. And so the story is about that whale hunt, all the things that happen, what it's like for him to come back and reconnect with his people and with his village and deal with the trauma that's been inflicted on himself and on where he'd been in Vietnam, and then on his own people. Just a really beautiful book. And for me, the power of the ocean is terrifying. And so to see, I'm a Midwesterner and grew up Flatlander, to see this people that is so intimately connected to the ocean, and to swimming in the ocean and communing with the animals in the ocean and the rhythms of their life around the whales' migration and all that, was so, so beautiful. So that was just a book that I really, really enjoyed. It happened to be at our library, so that was really wonderful. The other one is called House Made of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1969, and I didn't really intend for this, but this is also about a main character who enlists in the war. This man comes back from World War II with really bad PTSD and struggling with alcoholism to cope with the horrors of what he'd seen in war. He's Pueblo Indian, comes back to his village and can't function at all, ends up going to LA, spends time in prison. A lot of things happen, and eventually he is graced with friends and community and people who help bring him back to his ancestral heritage, to the things that had been extremely meaningful to him growing up. He had grown up steeped in his culture, but what had happened when he had left was so traumatic that it took a lifetime kind of to make it back to it. So both of those, one in the desert, one in the ocean, both of those novels really made a huge just mind-opening experience to see how people engage with the world around them, with their community, with their heritage, and what a resource that is for people who are really, really hurt by the things that they have experienced in their life. So those are two novels that really I highly recommend.
Thank you, Patty. I wrote those down because I can't wait to check them out. You always have good recommendations ever since I first spoke to you.
I love to read. I haven't read much this year, but I do love to read. And this has gotten me back into reading more.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's my turn, I guess. So I have a couple of books that I just want to share that I think people could benefit from on their journey with Christian animism, or their just spiritual journey, whatever road that they're taking. The first one is, let me make sure it's visible, Christian Animism, aptly named, by none other than Sean Sanford Beck. Let's make sure it's visible, but we'll include the names of the books and pictures later, right? So yeah, I'm still learning how to work with Zoom filters. So this book, Christian Animism, Sean, I think I reached out to you and told you this when I first joined the group, but it means so much to me, and I think it can be beneficial to newbies, I think, on the Christian animism path, because for me it showed me, oh my gosh, there's a term to explain my path, to explain what I believe, somebody else thinks this way. And not only that, they actually put it in a book. Like, I can hold it and I can say, here, read this. One thing I love about this book is that, for me, it doesn't seem to be so answer heavy. It doesn't answer questions, but it asks a lot of questions, and it opens up the reader's mind to thinking more about what we've always deemed as just standard and tradition. And I have a passage I wanted to highlight. That I did highlight, that I wanted to say briefly. Christian animism, then, is simply what happens when a committed Christian engages the world and each creature as alive, sentient, and related, rather than soulless and ontologically inferior. And a little further down, it says, what would liturgy look like, for instance, if we knew that plants, animals, and whole ecosystems were co-worshipers with us? How would our eschatologies change if we had to make room in heaven for the entire created order? My God, that's mind-blowing. Would our ethical processes morph if love your neighbor now included cows, plankton, and all manner of creepy crawlies? And what does pastoral care look like for trees anyways? All of these and more are questions with which a Christian animist perspective must engage. That right there, to me, was like, oh my gosh, what would it look like? What would this Christian journey look like, keeping those questions in mind? So that's one way I said the book asks the questions, the necessary questions, and it's so much fun to figure out the answer. Another book that I'll share that really means a lot to me is, and you guys know I love this book, Maya Toll's Wild Wisdom. Wild Wisdom. Thank you. Thanks, Patty.
Yeah.
This is a companion book. So for those who don't know, Maya Toll, she's a pretty eclectic author. You can look into her later. But this book, the subtitle is A Guided Journey into the Mystical Rhythms of the Natural World, Season by Season. So if you just want to have a framework, all right, how do I engage in this world? How do I do this? What does it mean to observe the world that I reside in? This is a really great way to start. It gives you guidelines on the summer equinox, the autumn equinox, how appropriate, and the different solstices that occur throughout the year, the wheel of the year. And it just gives you meditations and not necessarily meditations, but reflections and exercises that you can engage in during certain times of the year. So it's a good guide and framework to get you started to just noticing the world around us. So thank you guys.
Right
Nice,
on.
thank you.
Sounds good.
I totally love that passage that you just read from Sean's book. Those are such great questions, and I love that it's going to be answered totally different than in Arizona than it is in Maine, than it is in Saskatchewan, and wherever you are. So that's
for
just really wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Well done,
lovely,
Sean. Thank you.
lovely to hear you read that, Dina. It's amazing to hear somebody else read one's words. So
cool. Thank you.
So when I was trying to figure out what books I wanted to share, it's so difficult. I tend to default to academia, and so because there's tons of academic stuff that's been written, but I decided not to, because actually I realized what really started me on the path was not the thinking about it, but actually more the feeling of it, and also the transformation of the imagination. So I went to the books that helped me along the way through conversion of imagination. And the first one, I don't know if anybody's ever come across this. This is called Gnomes in the Garden.
Only
and
from
it's
you.
It's by David and Carol Swing. Primarily David. There are a couple, I believe they live in North Carolina, actually. And it's I don't know whether to call it fiction or nonfiction. They write it as nonfiction, but it reads like fiction, because it is David's. It's a chronicle of David's visions that he has, basically, of the sort of the spirit world of gnomes, elves, fairies opening up to him, and just him allowing you a glimpse into that. And it's so interesting because he introduces all of these different characters that he's meeting. I want to say in his inner world, but I'm not quite sure if that's how he experiences it. He and Carol write about it as if it is inner and outer. So just lovely. He says gnomes, elves, sprites, brownies, centaurs, trolls of the light. Gnomes in the Garden is filled with tales of the author's intriguing encounters with members of Celtic fairy tribes. The fair folk share their personal stories, spiritual quests, and adventures, so that you may learn for yourself what daily life is like in the fairy realm. That's from the back. And it's on one hand, it's very whimsical. You could read it as if it were fiction. On the other hand, woven into it are so many really good sort of Celtic Christian teachings. So he's definitely he and Carol are Christians, and they make no bones about that. And all of the fairies that they meet are also Christians, and so it's an approach to the Christian story from the point of view of the other world. And it's amazing. It's well worth it. He wrote a follow-up book called the Celtic Owl's Year, or the Celtic Owl's Adventure, something like that. But it goes through the eightfold wheel of the year, again, going at it from a fairy Christian, not a very Christian, although it is very Christian too, but a fairy Christian perspective. So that's the first book I want to talk about.
Have you guys read the Bromeliad trilogy?
I have not.
No.
Oh my goodness. I won't say a lot because it's called the Bromeliad trilogy, and it's a fiction. It's written for children about these gnomes who live in a department store, and so their worldview and their faith and everything is based on like the messages. In the department store, it says bargains galore. And so they treat that as like worship, bargains galore. Yeah, revelation. And everything must go when the department store starts to shut down, and then they realize that their entire world is changing, so they have to leave the safety of this department store and figure out how, as these tiny little people, to get themselves and their people out and to safety. And it's whimsical and adorable and funny, and yeah, so it's
Wow.
a kind of a fiction version of what you had. We stumbled on it when my son was little and read it together, and I still delight in reading it. It's so much fun. So
Lovely, lovely. It so often is the children's books that get us in the heart and
Yes.
sort of stay there and lodge
Yeah.
there. Yeah,
yeah,
Yeah.
really, really grab you.
Yeah.
nice.
Well,
Round
so
two.
round two. So my next one, kind of similar to what you just said, Sean. I have read a lot of nonfiction kind of theology books. Refugia Faith by Deborah Reinstra, Shalom in the Community of Creation, An Indigenous Vision by Randy Woodley, and then A Primer in Ecotheology by Celia Dean Drummond, that have really been like helped me think through what some of the things are to do with creation care. What does this mean to have a different understanding of creation than the sort of inert lump that we may have inherited, that I inherited from my life growing up and scientific learning, which I'm not dissing science. I'm a nurse. I'm all for science. But it has not, my education did not teach me how to understand creation in the way, like the video that we watched earlier of the song with sons and daughters. So the books that fill me with light are often works of fiction and teach me how to understand my connection to the kin around me. So Overstory, which is probably one that a lot of people have read, is the next one that when I really thought about books that have had an impact on me recently. It's the story mainly of these 9 characters, kind of mostly on the West Coast of the United States, and their relationship to and their growing understanding of what the importance of trees and how human destruction has impacted the world. Some of them go on to become radical environmental activists that work on defending trees. One studies trees, and that character is modeled after Suzanne Simard, that some people might recognize. I think it's her latest book is Finding the Mother Tree. Highly, highly recommend those for people who are exploring this. It's set up in 4 sections. It's root, trunk, crown, and seeds. So you walk through these characters through the downs and ups of their lives, thinking through the life cycle of a tree. So you see this sort of big, wide connection with creation, but then these intimate personal journeys that each of them have with trees, sometimes in very harsh, difficult ways, sometimes in beautifully transcendent ways. And I know, especially in the Christian animism group and among the 3 of us, we've talked a lot about how we have learned to connect with trees and how we have relationships with specific trees. So that has, and a lot of popular culture writing about trees, it just feels like there's been an explosion of books and things that help us think about and understand what trees, who trees are, and how we relate to them. And I've just reread Overstory for a book group that I'm in, and so it's kind of foremost in my mind. This second one is a nonfiction book called Underland. So I liked Overstory and Underland. This is by Robert McFarland, and he spends hours and days diving into the earth and understanding what the deep, dark places of the earth mean. He looks at sea caves in Norway. He does this amazing journey through the Paris catacombs and meets these explorers and people who like spelunk under Paris into all these deep, deep places. And he spends a night sleeping in basically a little tomb, not much bigger than he is, and just seeing what that's like to basically kind of be buried and what that feels like. There's a place, there's a section on the sinkhole in Slovenia. There's a section on sea caves in Norway and some of the prehistoric art that is in there. So some of the reviews talk about him exploring burial and loss as he's diving in under the ground to these places that we don't go. There's a quote from it. He says, "Humans have long placed in the deep earth that which we fear and wish to lose, and that which we love and wish to save. So he writes constantly about this relationship between the world around and how that impacts people and their hearts and their lives. He's got a bunch of, I've enjoyed all of his books. I feel like I have to say, I just looked up a few of the reviews, and there was a guy from The Guardian who caricatured landmarks and another one of his books, and uses this term McFarlish, that he has this process of praising other authors to make your own book look better by association. So, you know, I think he gets a little bit of flack sometimes for the way he writes. One guy said that he's got that BBC, PBS way of writing to make everything sound like a nature documentary. But I have really enjoyed that way of writing, and have, just appreciated the way he just goes to these places and inhabits them and is part of them in such a visceral way. Like, I can't imagine spending the night in a catacomb in the dark when you turn off your light and there's absolutely no light at all. So I highly recommend Overstory and Underland.
Cool. Very nice pairing, by the way.
That's what I was thinking too. Yeah.
Well, I stumbled on them unexpectedly, and I was like, oh, this is just too funny to read a book called Overstory and then find a book called Underland. Oh, wow. And it was really, like, it felt different to read Overstory and these people who are climbing trees, and then watch him dive down into the chalk caves that go under the English Channel. It was like, oh,
the
my
equinox
gosh, this is such
is
a
the
different
season.
place. Right, find balance.
Not that balance.
The balance. Yeah.
We're nothing if but balance, people. Ha ha.
For yourself.
I know.
Right. That was, I guess I'm nothing then. I'm certainly not a balanced
tongue
person.
in cheek.
Patty, I loved everything you just said. Especially, I didn't even realize that the books that I have are nonfiction. And when you explained why you have some fiction, well, mostly, fiction and nonfiction, I thought, well, I wonder why I have mine are nonfiction. And I think it's because where you were saying, not to compare, but just to bring attention back to it, when you were saying that you got some light from that fiction, you said that they bring you light. I think there are so many fiction books that have helped me on my just reading about them, reading different plots and different fiction stories. But I thought to myself, when I was in that realm of denial, I was like, oh, this is fiction. This is just fantasy. Now I can go back and reread them and go, just like I said, when I saw Sean's book, someone actually does feel this way. I can do the same with fiction and not just dismiss it as nonsense. So I'm going to go back and do that now to honor that past that I just said, this is my fiction. This is my fiction realm. It's like, no, somebody actually felt this and thought it, and they just put it in this fiction. So I love that. But okay, so my next two books are, of course, can't be a Christian animist without my Bible. Let me see. Can you see this?
Yes.
This is my Bible case, actually.
All your notes.
All my notes and things. Yeah, it's invisible.
Nice.
Oh, here it is. I'll get it right one day with these filters. Or I'll sit in a room that I don't mind having on Zoom, showing on Zoom.
Or they'll improve the tech that it won't freak out when you put something one inch too far away.
Yes. So I think, I've gone through ups and downs in my journeys, my spiritual journey. And my questions always change based on where I am in life. I'm not going to say they change, but they grow. I have more and more. And then some fall off. Some I feel like, I get it now, so I might have gotten the answer. As my mom always reminds me, we'll understand it better by and by. It's an old, I think it's an old spiritual. So my Bible is just one of my absolute most important treasures that I have. And I reference it always whenever I have a question. My stepkids have a question, why is this? Why is that? I don't always like some of the answers. I'm like, well, this is saying this and I don't get this. but it doesn't matter if I like it. It's what it is. And I'll either get it or I won't. It's just like anyone's work, you know, it doesn't matter if I like it. It's what was put down. And that's what the Bible is, you know, is saying. So one of my favorite books in the Bible is the book of James. I just think it's good. It's good living. It's like, this is good. This is a really great reference for how to just living, no matter what your background is, you know, just good reference for life. But again, for me as a Christian animist, I just didn't, I enjoy coming back to the Bible. Some things I don't understand. Some things I get creeped out by and I skip over. I'm like, yeah, I don't want to think about that, you know? But like the end of days, I don't want to read that at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's just, it's not for me. But God bless the people that can do that. I can't do it yet. Yeah, so I just love it. And I just wanted to put that out there because I feel like Jesus was a pretty cool, amazing person, still is, you know, and I always tell people when I talk about my faith, I'm like, it's some things that people say with Christianity, oh, Jesus died for your sins and all these things. You know, I've heard that. I get it. I get the idea behind it, but that's not necessarily what speaks to me. Simply about Jesus' life. I think, you know, in 2023, his life can really be an example of, you know, politics, persecution, censorship, as well as spirituality and showing us how to rely on the one who created us, you know, getting out of the ego and into the spiritual realm. So we could have a whole conversation. I know all three of us certainly can on Jesus. I don't want to try to put him in a box with anything I'm saying, but I always learn more and more about him and what he had to say and his life and his resurrection. Every time I read that, it means something different. So just really thankful. And my final book for this chat is, oh, you said, hold it close to me. This is kind of reversed. It's mirror. So I should have mirrored my screen, but
you can see it good.
It works good. Yeah.
Animal Speak. Yeah. Animal Speak. So it's by Ted Andrews, The Spiritual and Magical Powers of Creatures Great and Small. That's the subtitle. And it's just a compilation of lessons and lessons from the natural world, I guess, that Ted Andrews acquired over time. And he has a really extensive bibliography in the back. So whether you're a shaman, whether you are just beginning your walk in animism and Christianity, it's just a really great book to have. It gives you a list of animals, birds, 4-leggeds, 2-leggeds, and their overall keynotes, their cycle of power, and their history. So I'm going to give an example. For a cardinal, it'll say the cardinal's keynotes are renewed vitality through recognizing self-importance. The cycle of power is year-round. And then it talks about the lesson and the medicine, the animal medicine that the cardinal can bring to one's daily life. If you feel like, you know what, I feel like I can align with an armadillo, or something, you wake up and you say, you know, Brother Armadillo, what do you have to show me today? Or what can I learn from today? Because who doesn't wake up and think of armadillos? This says your
anybody in Chicago.
Mostly anyone in Philadelphia, but you know, I'm always the oddball. Keynote: personal protection, empathy, discrimination. It'll tell you the cycle of power, whether it's spring or summer, and it'll give you a history of the not the history, but context about the armadillo. Its most basic information: the armor is comprised of bony plates, the undersides are ordinary hide. It's a burrowing animal, so it gives you the basic facts, but it also tells you, armadillo teaches you how to protect yourself and when to let your defenses down. Mm-hmm. So I think this book is just really helpful, because whether or not some people have oracle cards and they'll pull up a card and say, what should I learn from today? Mm-hmm. You know, you can find a card and then go to the corresponding page that shows you the animal that you align with. If you have something like that, if you dream about an animal and you say, you know what, there was a lion in my dream, what could that mean? I feel like Ted Andrews' book is pretty consistent. His work tends to be pretty consistent. So you can see, okay, I dreamed about a lion. What would this lion be trying to tell me? And then you can pull it up. It has a picture. It'll have history and information on the lion and just lessons. The lion does not fight for the sake of fighting. It avoids confrontations and will leave the scene of danger if possible. This is a tactic to keep in mind if lion is your totem. Be stealthy for the greatest success. So just practical advice, practical guidance on how to apply our four-legged, two-legged, winged, scaled brethren, how to apply their lessons to our lives. And hopefully as we do this, we also realize, okay, now how can I give back? How can I not just take from the world, but also give back? I found through this book, after having a dream a few years ago about a gray wolf, I looked up wolves, I started studying wolves, and now I'm an active participant, I'll say, with gray wolf preservation. So that's just something that, since the wolf has given so much to me, it's like I want to give back to wolf. So again, Animal Speak by Ted Andrews. That's one of my favorite books for my Christian animist journey.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Right on.
Thank you, guys.
I could listen to both of you go on about these books. There's so much, isn't there? Like there's so much we could,
many.
And it leads us into so many different areas too. Like especially, going with, well, bring in the Bible, yeah, and then we're into all types of stuff. That's awesome. Yeah. But the Ted Andrews one reminds me of the whole genre of medieval literature that we've by and large lost, of the bestiary. These books of beasts that are meticulously and beautifully illuminated and have all of these sort of teachings that are connected with the various beasts of, our brethren and sisterin of the more than human world, and how they teach us. So awesome. There's so many more we could get into, and there's a lot, just as a reminder to folks listening, watching, there's a lot of good books, a lot of good resources, articles, books, recordings that are referenced on the Christian Animism website. So just for folks to find their way there and have a look at all of the books compiled there, which I know Patty had a big hand in shaping that collection.
I think I was a librarian in a former life.
You must have been. Yeah, that's a real gift, right?
I love that site. You did such a beautiful job with that.
It's so good.
That is like, I love doing stuff like that. So we gotta fix because I want to put these all on there, and I got to get the passwords updated because I can't get on right now.
Tech. So my last book that I want to share is basically anything by Charles DeLint, with the exception of one or two that he wrote under a different name. So don't worry about that. He's got some he's got some horror stuff that I would recommend. But any of his he calls it's called urban fantasy. It's not only urban though, but Charles DeLint lives in Ottawa. He's a Canadian author, been writing for years and years and years, and lots of short stories. The book that I just showed, called Dreams Underfoot, is one of his first collections of short stories. But he's got novellas and novels and lots of short stories. But they are just, again, going back to this sense of how the lines between fiction and nonfiction blur, right? Because for so many of us, we grow up indoctrinated in the notion that nonfiction, the real world, works this way, that way, the other way. And it doesn't, if you can't measure it, replicate it, scientificize it, it doesn't exist, right?
Yeah.
That is a real word. I just, scientificize.
I'm looking that one up.
But for so many of us, I think we live, and the deeper we go along the path of Christian animism, and in other spiritualities as well, it's not just Christian, but anybody walking an animist path in general recognizes that the world is so much more enchanted, so much more magical than what we were led to believe, what the line that we were sort of fed as children, right? well, actually, as children, we knew it was enchanted, and then
Yeah.
we learned otherwise. We had
Yes.
it learned to us otherwise. So Charles DeLint, just a really inspiring way of going into stories that deal both with very wonderful human interpersonal relationships, but always with the other world woven in. And it's funny because my son and I were actually able to go. We were in Ottawa a number of years ago and looked him up and just got in touch with him and ended up having
wow.
supper with him and his wife. They were
Nice.
very hospitable. My son was in Ottawa for a writing award, yeah, and so they wanted to talk to the give this young author their ear in
Wow.
their living room for the evening, and so
Wow.
we all just talked, and I asked him at one point. I said, like, what's the religion that informs this? And of course, I wasn't trying to pigeonhole him, but I wanted to get a sense of, because they're deeply spiritual books, and he hinted at his own animism within that. That really it's the sense of the whole world having spirit and having consciousness and being alive in ways that we often forget. Our eyes are often closed to that aliveness. So Charles DeLint helps me open my eyes.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, it's so good to talk to you guys.
It really
I'm
is.
looking forward to reading these books.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and we offer them to all who might be seeing this video, and we'd love to hear from you all too. Like, what books are you reading? What have you come
Yeah.
across that have helped you in your journey? And you can just put it in the comment section or onto our Facebook page, the Christian Animism Facebook page, whichever way you want. We'd love to hear about what other people are being fed by in their reading. We could go on forever. We'll do more videos. We'll be back again. And good to see both of you and good to see everybody.
Likewise.
Yes.
All right. Take care,
See
folks.
ya. Bye, everyone.
Bye now.